Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Adam.
And today we're going to talk about the game we just finished playing, Arcs. But before we do, I have some poll results to discuss. On Twitter this week, I asked the poll if the game's really hyped, lots of attention, strong reviews, shooting up the BGG rankings, does that get you more or less excited about it? The reason I asked this question, I was getting together with a couple guys who were invited me over to play some games, and I was like, hey, you want me to bring Arc Nova? I didn't think they'd played it yet. And one of the guys says, this is Scott, by the way. Call out to you, Scott. I'm calling you out here. But he says, man, I don't know. That game just seems so overhyped. I don't think I'm going to like it. And that surprised me. Like, I think in general, I at least want to play games that have a lot of attention that a lot of people are liking. I'm not turned off by them. So I was curious how the other people felt about that. So how do you answer this, Adam? How do you feel about games that are hyped up?
I forget. I think I put something like it makes me curious about them. Like, why are they getting so much hype? Is it the designer, or is it like some new 4X, or is it some new, it makes me curious. So why is the hype there? Is the game good? I kind of want to investigate it and either add to the hype or debunk the hype one way or the other, or just, I don't know, or stay neutral about it. Be like, yeah, the game was fine. I don't know. So it makes me curious. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I said no impact because I think, even games that are getting a lot of attention, if it doesn't seem like my type of game, it still doesn't get me, I don't think, any more excited to play it. But I definitely get curious, right? If a lot of people are raving about a game, I want to give it a shot. It means there might be some kind of special sauce there, some magic. I don't generally believe that games are popular just because people want to talk them up. I think they're popular because a lot of people like them. So, it may or may not be for me, but I think for the most part, I think a game that a lot of people are excited about has probably at least got something interesting going on.
For sure. What did the respondents say here?
So we had a whole bunch of answers on here, and if you don't follow us on Twitter, you should at BG_hot takes. Every week we ask a poll on here, and lots of people give responses, usually lots of really fun and interesting answers. Maurice Andrews Jr. said, the community will gravitate to what they love. If it's a type of game that I love, I'll be more inclined to fall into the hype. Even if it's not something I love, then the hype will put it on my radar to check out at some point. Yeah, so that's kind of how I fall with it. Pretty close. All Games New and Old said, as much as I like to think I'm above getting swept up in game hype, I'm absolutely not. It gets me nearly every time. Never Say Die said, using Narc Ova as an example, I was really excited about it as the positive feedback started rolling in, but there was a point where skepticism took hold and my interest turned into rebellion. And he's got a gif of the guy at the end of Breakfast Club throwing his fist up in the air.
That was a good one, yeah.
Nice. And Mr. Rao said, no impact. I'm skeptical of the BGG rankings from the get-go, though. It's a high school popularity contest at the best of times. Games that get lots of hype are probably well deserving of being in the spotlight, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good game for me. Mr. Rao, we need to have a conversation about BGG rankings, and I'd love to hear one of your rants about this, because I bet I don't see eye to eye with you on it. So that'd be a fun conversation, I think. Anyway, a whole lot of other answers. Here's how people answered the poll, though. 52% said they were more excited about it because of hype. 33% said no impact. 11% said less, and 4% said, I already hate it. So I wanted to give somebody an answer to, immediately, I'm hearing people excited about it, and I'm out.
Now, I have a question for you. When a game gets hyped, it's generally a new game, right? Are there any old games that get hyped that you can think of?
I think it's usually a new game. I mean, it sometimes, games get on the radar. Maybe it's because it got delivered off Kickstarter on a second Kickstarter that everybody's waiting for. Or, occasionally you get games like Shoutout and Sit Down is such a huge channel now that if they talk about a game, even if it's 4 or 5 years old, all of a sudden you'll see it jump up on the hotness, and you can see all kind of, people will start raving about it. But yeah, I think it's usually new games. And I don't know what it is. I think there's a little bit of a, people think oh, it's a hot new thing. It can't be good. It's just I think they blame it on marketing. They're kind of feeling it's just people are excited about it because reviewers told them to be excited about it. And I just don't think that actually happens. I think you can have a ton of paid reviewers raving about a game, and if people are playing it, not getting excited about it, not sharing it with their friends, then I just don't think it sticks around. I think the games that get really hyped really do, hit with a lot of people.
Yeah, the model's kind of weird, right? Especially with the Kickstarters and the paid previewers that hype up everything and get people into it, and it means nothing. It's so shallow, but the hype that can be generated is crazy. So I mean, speaking of models, Stonemaier games always seem to get super hyped when they announce a release. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, good question. I mean, partly they probably do a good job of marketing stuff, but also I think they've just got a lot of loyal fans. Like people just love their games. They love the customer service they've gotten from them. I mean, that's what I think has been happening. Like you got Jamie Stegmaier has like 20,000 Twitter followers. Like there isn't really many board game personalities where they've got that many people that are just interested to see what they release next and want to hear about it. So it's kind of just like a built-in audience. No matter the game. And from my perspective, they still tend to put out pretty fun games, with nice productions. And so they're always something I'm interested in trying out, whether it's a huge hit for me or not.
It seems like a Capstone's starting to kind of reach that threshold too. For better or for worse, almost anything that they put out that gets plenty of buzz and plenty of hype.
Yeah. And Leader Games, and we're going to be talking about ARCs tonight, but I think Leader Games is another one that right now just has like a huge following, it's almost cult-like, like they're people that just love Root. That's all they want to play. So Leader Games announces another game and it's a huge hit. And I think when Root first got announced like 3 years ago, they had put out Vast, which was kind of a mediocre hit that was doing something kind of unique. And Root, just took the world by storm, the cute creatures and, the interesting production. And then obviously it hit with a lot of people. So, but since then it's like, Leader announces something and you're going to have a lot of people talking about it.
Yep.
Well, anyway, let's jump into a description of ARCs.
In ARCs, 3 or 4 players take the role of regents of a formerly formidable, presently perishing empire that once spanned to the furthest worlds known. A mysterious blight is sweeping across the outermost worlds, and players must contend with this, in addition to each other, to ensure their survival and growth in a hostile universe. After establishing the location of ships, extractors, and factories on the galaxy map, which can be either predetermined or executed draft style, a la something like Risk, players are dealt 5 or 6 cards depending on player count. There are 4 suits of cards, each suit offering 2 or 3 types of action, and each of those can be executed between 1 and 4 times. For example, the construction card suit gives you access to the build or research actions, and a value 1 construction card will let you take 3 actions split between building or researching, while a value 3 construction card lets you build or research only twice. In a round, the first or lead player plays any card and immediately executes the actions. Subsequent players now have restrictions on their choices of cards they can play. They can play the same suit if it's higher than the lead and execute the card normally. They can play any card face down to execute only 1 action permitted by the suit played by the first player. And finally, they can play a different suit to execute only 1 action provided from that suit. The player who played the highest value suit of the lead suit becomes the first player the next round, unless someone has discarded an additional card to seize the initiative and become the first player in the next round. Amazing. Players proceed until no one has any cards left. I didn't mention resource cards, and resource cards can help you build buildings or provide actions before a player begins their turn. For example, a fuel resource allows a player to do a move action at the beginning of their turn. Once players are out of cards, or all have passed, the end of round phase begins, where influence auctions are resolved, resulting in production, technological advancement, or immediate bonuses. And finally, end of round scoring occurs. After the 5th round, a final objective is also scored, and the player with the most power, aka victory points, is the winner. I didn't mention many things like battle, but we'll cover more of the specifics of the game momentarily. The game is still in development, and the version we played was as of May 31st, 2022. ARCs is being designed by Cole Worley, features art by Kyle Farron, and is expected to be published in 2023 by Leader Games.
We're going to talk about the gameplay and mechanisms of ARCs first. Now, Adam and I have only had one play of this game. We played it on Tabletop Simulator. It is available out to play right now if you want to give it a try while the Kickstarter is live. I think this Kickstarter is going to end about a week after this episode releases. So may still be there if this conversation gets you interested. Otherwise, they'll usually do late pledges, and Leader Games tends to release things to retail after the Kickstarter backed anyway. So if you hear this in several months, you can still find an opportunity to look into it. But I was kind of interested in it myself. If you go back and listen to our review of Root, I wasn't a big fan of Root. Adam, you weren't either. But when I heard about this game being kind of a more streamlined system from Cole Wehrle, I was definitely a little more interested. And the mechanism sounded kind of interesting. They used the trick-taking mechanism, kind of like Brian Boru, which we've talked about before. So had me a little intrigued, but I didn't have high expectations because I'm not a big Root fan, and that's kind of been put out here by the same team. So that's where we're coming from. But let's talk a little bit about the mechanism. So what stands out to you?
Yeah, I do want to mention too that this is by no means the final version of the game, but I think there's a nice solid core there. So it'll be something similar with some tweaks, I imagine. What stands out to me, I'm going to start with a subtler aspect of the game. It's a part of the trick-taking mechanism, specifically the ability to seize the initiative. In other words, to grab the lead. If you're familiar with trick-taking games, normally the highest card of the suit that's led will take the lead, or whoever plays the trump card will take the lead. That means play the first card the next round. Here it's just a very subtle, I think amazingly clever mechanism that stands out to me. You can play a card and then you can play a second card from your hand face down in order to ensure that you're going to have the lead for the next round. So what that does, it can turn your hand of garbage, potential garbage, into a pretty good hand at the expense of giving up one turn that series of tricks. It's a little complicated. I'm getting into a lot of the verbiage of trick taking and stuff. But anyway, that ability to seize the initiative is what they call it in the rule book. In other words, to ensure that you're going to be leading for the next round of play is just fascinating. I think it's incredibly clever. It stood out to me as being amazing as we were playing the game. Tim, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really important option they gave here because the action selection you're getting is based on a random hand of cards that you're drawing. And if we played a 3-player game and it was 6 cards to start, you don't really have any control over that. So in a trick-taking game, if you have a hand of cards, you can just get stuck with a crappy hand. And if you manage to, somebody's leading and you're not able to take the lead from them and they're just able to kind of run the rest of the thing, that can be really rough. And so that's especially rough here. Now, there's a couple mechanisms that this game does to help mitigate that to some extent, but this initiative steal is one of those things, and it's a very tough choice, but I definitely used it because I saw you use it, I think, in the second turn of the game, and I was like, oh, and I'm threw away an action for that. I'm never going to do that. That's a waste of a turn. But a couple rounds later, here I was with an action that would have given me a card that would have given me 3 powerful actions. It would have really impacted the objectives for that turn and really important for me. So I gave up that one extra action and it really helped. I managed to take both the objectives that were available in that round because I was able to do that. So it gives you a really good option to steal that lead if you really need to. But since we're talking about the trick taking, there's a couple other things that happen here that are kind of interesting, right? So the first player, just to get into the details here a little bit, the first player is going to play the lead card. And there's, 4 different suits? I think it's 4 different suits.
Yep.
And each of the suits basically give a player one of 2 or sometimes 3 different actions they can choose from. So for example, there's the action, the one that lets you do an attack. The attack action lets you either do moves or attacks. And so the lower number card you play, the more actions of that type you're going to be able to get. So if somebody leads, for example, with the 1 of this card, they're going to get 3 actions from it. And then the people that follow, and this is where the decisions get interesting, the people that follow have a couple different choices, right? They can follow with the same suit of a higher number. And if they do that, then they get those actions and they'll get the number of actions that are listed on their card. The problem is that the higher number cards tend to give you less actions. So if you can go 1 higher, sometimes you can still get a couple of good actions out of it. Otherwise, you can pivot, so you can play a card of any other suit of any number, and you can get 1 of the actions from that. And that at least gives you some flexibility, right? You're not stuck following the suit. And if you don't want to do an attack and you want to do a build or something like that, research, you can still do that, but you're only going to get one of the options. So you're kind of maybe giving up some benefits. And lastly, if you just really want to do what the leader did, but you don't have those cards, you can just flip a card over and copy what they're doing, and you still get one of the actions. You have a lot of flexibility here, but you're always trying to optimize on how can I take advantage of getting multiple actions in that turn. And that's where the fun puzzle is in this trick taking. But I never felt too hemmed in on it. I would get a hand every time and kind of be like, well, here's a bunch of fun stuff to do. Let's see what Steve leads with, and then I'll see what I can do to follow it. And I think I could probably optimize that a little bit better, just like I tend to do with trick taking. I never really think of how to take advantage of it until I'm several hands in and it's really starting to get into the flow of the thing. And I think I probably didn't optimize, the first few rounds here, but the more you play this, I think you'd start to find that the patterns of like, oh wait, I've got the 3, 4, 5 in my hand, so I know that if I play the 3 here, no one can follow me, and I'm gonna lead the next 2 tricks. And so there's a lot of fun choices to make there.
It's gonna seem like we're talking a lot about the trick taking aspect of the game, but I think it's so clever and so unique. I think it's worth it. So I'm also gonna talk about it more too, because I want to talk about the resolution order. So in lots of games, Brian Boru, for instance, everybody plays their card and then the actions resolve at the end of the round. And Brian Boru, I think it goes highest to lowest or lowest to highest. I forget which way, the cards are numbered 1 to 25. So a lot of times, the actions that coincide with the cards played will resolve. So here, you play your card and you do the actions right away. You don't even wait for the other people to play their cards that round. So there's another difference in this, what's being called trick taking here. So I thought that was just a neat aspect too. So again, if you're the first player in the round, you get to play a card, and no matter what, you get to do all the actions on that card. You don't have to wait. You don't have to see if someone's going to beat you with a higher card. No, you just get to do it. That's why it's so important to be going first in the round. So just to back that up a little bit, I'm really enjoying all these variations on trick taking. You got shamans, which is kind of a free-for-all, do whatever you want. You've got Brian Boru, which is a little interesting too, not traditional trick taking like spades, for instance. And then what's the other one? Ghosts of Christmas I recently played. That's another kind of variation. And then here it really blurs the line between hand management and trick taking. I think it has the trick taking elements, but it's really also working with those 5 or 6 cards in your hand. You really have to do. But anyway, I'm going on a ramble here a little bit. But what do you think of that ability to resolve your card right away and not have to wait to see who's gonna trump you or play a higher card?
Yeah, that's the key here, right? It never felt like I said, I always felt like I had some decent flexibility. So if you're playing first, just do your thing and take advantage of it as much. Of course, if you play a lower number and get the most benefits, you have the risk of losing initiative for the next turn. And so it's still an interesting choice to make. It didn't really feel like I was being hampered by my opponents. There was definitely interaction. I had to watch what you guys might play. I had to think about what cards you might have in your hand. But it was nice that, hey, I'm going to just take my action and do it, and you figure out what you're going to do after me. And then it's important to see how that resolves and who ends up with the initiative for the next turn. Yeah, I thought it was great. And I think, of course, we have to compare this to Brian Boru because, it's another, kind of weighty board game that uses trick taking for the action selection. And I have to say, I think it hit even more here. Like, I like Brian Boru. But I thought that it was fun, man. It was every time. I never felt too bad about what I had to do. There was one more choice I want to talk about there, and that is that, like, if I had the lead, but I had a card in my hand that didn't really give me an action I wanted, you can just pass. And then the next person next to you, maybe they lead with something you want, so you can copy them. And I took advantage of that several times. And it was always interesting. And half the time, one of you guys would play exactly the card I had in my hand. And I was like, oh man, I didn't get the benefit from it anyway. But sometimes I did. Sometimes you guys would play exactly what I wanted, and I get to do that extra action I wanted. So tons of cool choices here.
Yeah, again, just the variations and the way it's done are just fantastic here for the trick-taking card play aspect of the game. I feel like you still have enough agency in what you want to do. And Brian Boru, I feel like that gets lost a little bit to go back and compare it to Brian Boru.
Yeah.
Like you're not always able to do what you want to do necessarily. But here, it really felt like the order in which you played cards, if you want to seize that initiative, if you want to pass the initiative, it all adds up to this game that lets you feel clever, lets you feel like you are able to, make some moves that are going to help you out and give you more agency despite the hand that you're dealt, which is just It's cool, and it's just such a smart way to do it. I really loved it.
Yeah, now let me talk about my favorite part about the game, and that is the objective cards. And basically, the way you're going to get almost all your points in this game is that there's always 2 active objective cards, and you can always see what the next one that's going to come over is. So, in the starting round, you have 2 objective cards available. At the start of the next round, one of them falls off, and then the next one that you already knew about is going to come on. So for most of the game, you're going to get to activate any one objective card at least twice over 2 different rounds. I always love these kinds of little okay, here's my goal for this round. Let me hone in on it. And I was comparing this to Gaia Project a little bit, which has those round, scoring goals. But these felt more dynamic and really drove the gameplay in a more interesting way. Like, just to give you an example, I'm looking at the rule book right here, and one of them they have listed as Tycoon, have the most cards in your hand. And so that's an interesting one, because that means that you're basically passing at the end of the round and holding onto a card in order to get some extra points. Or the Pragmatist, pivot the most times. Whenever you pivot, place influence here. Pivot meaning that you're switching to a different card. So on this round, you're kind of motivated to not follow the leader and instead pivot. You might get some extra points for it, but they're not huge point swings.
There was one that's had the most ships on the board at the end of the round. There was one that's occupied the most territories without any other enemies in them. There's just varying, subtle, just gives you a goal to go for. They're really neat.
Aside from those round objectives, which were the most fun part for me, but everybody had a private objective, which seemed pretty vastly different, maybe kind of a slightly hard to achieve goal. What I noticed in our game is that I had a goal that would give me 5 points, which is a pretty significant amount of points at the end of the game, but it's pretty tough to hit. But you guys both had goals that were flexible. Like, if you did 1 to 5 things, you'd get 1 to 5 points. So when you chose to turn it in, you could just try to do it at an optimal time. You get a few points for it. So interesting variety of stuff there. And then there is also a final objective. This is something that's visible at the start of the game that is worth a decent amount of points. 8 points if you do the best at it, and 3 points if you're second. And this is a kind of a weird, like in our game, it was kind of a thing where if you could collect 3 resources and then take an influence action, you could dump one of those resources and put an influence on this thing, and whoever had the most influence at the end of the game would get points. So it kind of drove people to drive a little bit of an economy in one type of resource and then use some of those influence actions. I don't know, something about the objective scoring of this was really fun to me. This was not just a point salad. You're really driven at certain times to, do I want to focus on this objective this turn, or is Adam clearly going to get it? So I'll ignore it and set myself up for maybe next round's objective, or try to work towards the final objective a little bit. And I just found it so fun. It was like every round I was just looking for new things to try and spread out. The one other place you can get points here is by attacking blight on the board, or by attacking one of your opponent's buildings as well. And so that was kind of cool as well, because it kind of motivated you to stretch out, go into areas that had other buildings, and of course go into your opponent's areas, which is part of what you want to do in a 4X game.
Yeah, so you're bringing up a lot of these things, and a lot of them are, I think, compared directly. They're like pieces from Root, and some of these are pieces kind of from PAX Premier 2nd Edition, which I'm very familiar with. Those are both Cole-worthy designs too. So talking about those objectives has a little bit of the feel of like a market road, kind of this river that marches down, the ability to plan ahead and anticipate what's going to happen and try to structure what you're going to do this round to roll that into the next round, and maybe kind of double up, build ships while you're going to these unoccupied territories. So you hit in 2, 3 of these goals in order. It gives a nice flow of the game and things to go for, and it lets you see what your opponents are doing too and try to counter that. So I think that's just fascinating, Tim. Those objectives flowing down, the little end around scoring objectives were great. On the other side of the board, you have this area where you're placing influence resources out there, which is also just fantastic. This is kind of like an auction thing. This compares again with Brian Boru, I think, and some of the 4 secondary objectives in Brian Boru that you're going for around the board. So you're building these influence. If you have the most influence in the region, you get to do that action or take that card, and then you clear your influence out. Everybody else's influence stays in that section for the next round, and then you do it all again. It's just fantastic. And the way it resolves top to bottom might have an effect on the cards later in that round that are snatched up. Very cool system there. What'd you think of that, the influence side of the board?
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, really streamlined. I mean, basically just I'm going to put influence out there, but it was so interactive. Like, you guys were constantly, I felt like I'd be like, okay, I want this one card, so I'm going to put 2 influence on there. And inevitably, before the end of the round, someone else has moved 2 influence there just to block me from getting it. But it was kind of cool too. Like, first of all, there's always 3 cards in those influence areas, and so those are going to change every round as far as what cards are available. And these can be upgrades to your current technologies, they can be new technologies, they can be one-time effects. I had one that was an endgame scoring condition. And they were all interesting to see what came up every round, and there's a lot of variety in it. But then you had the couple of spaces, one that just let you activate all your factories, and one that let you activate all your extractions, which are, you know, kind of your production cities. And those were really valuable too, because like, if you've got a few production plants out there and you can activate all of them, that's as good as playing a 3-point production card, which was not easy to do and not easy to pull off. A lot of fun interactions that are always fighting for. I'm always watching for what you guys are going for and thinking about what I could pull out there. Really liked it.
One thing we haven't talked about yet is the map itself, the board, outer space with the planets and the hexes and the void. The different parts of the map are cool too. So when you're talking about this production, one of the areas out there were these 2 blue sections where if you had control of those, you get to produce a resource as well. So that was part of that end of round resolution too. So you have all that area. There's a couple areas where there's no fighting allowed. And we did just play the one game, not the campaign, which is coming. And I think that's the only version that's available for the common folk right now. So the map itself, I thought, was cool. And looking at the campaign one, there's going to be abilities to have a more dynamic map where stuff's going to be changing from game to game to game. So the map itself, I thought, was fantastic. Easy to get around. You have these black holes. It's not a huge, overwhelming map, but it's more interesting. I don't know. It's just an interesting map. A lot going on there in a easy to parse situation.
Yeah, I agreed. I'm glad you called out the map because I also wanted to talk about it. I liked that there was a variety of spaces that did some different things there, as you mentioned. There's one ion storm space you could move through with a little bit of risk, but potentially some reward for it. There are these wormholes around, so you're never too far disconnected from other parts of the map. You can kind of teleport over to another part of the map. And then just the planets themselves, the makeup of them were kind of unique because each of the planets has different production types that you can create. They have different spaces on them, so one planet will only have one circle and one square, which means you can only build one square type of building and one circle type of building. But that means only one blight's going to show up there when you move into that sector. And then there's other ones that have like two squares, so they're a little riskier, but then have more opportunities to produce on them. So a lot of fun there in this board. Now, I do suspect that it would probably start to feel a little tired if you played this game over and over again. Like, okay, this is always the best spot to start in. So we're going to auction off the starting turn, and everyone's going to start here. I don't know, but I think the game's ripe for outside of the campaign mode, which I'm very interested to explore. I think the game is ripe for simple expansions of additional maps. It would have been kind of cool, and maybe they'll do this before the end of the campaign, if they at least did like a double-sided map with at least a couple different maps in there. That would give a little bit of nice variety in there. I'm not sure it needs it, but I think it'd be fun.
We played the quick start version. There's also the version you were alluding to, Tim, where players take turns putting their pieces out there and, like you said, giraffe their starting positions rather than just have the standardized starting positions.
Yeah, and I suspect that that's partly why it felt like it could get repetitive if we played the intro version every time, where all of your ships are all in 3 segments right next to each other, and you're kind of separated in different types of the board. I could imagine in a game after you get to know this a little bit, where Steve just put his first. He claimed his first planet, so Adam's going to take the one right behind him to block him off from the wormhole over there, and then Tim's going to go all the way to the other side of the map to make sure that he's far away from everybody, and then the next person's going to place their next planet, and it's going to be like, okay, well, I got to get right next to Tim there. So a little more dynamic, probably did a little bit less secure, right? Because we all started kind of grouped, all of our ships grouped in one area, so it was not very safe to go in and attack somebody, at least at the beginning of the game. And I bet if you were more spread out in that type of game, you end up with more quicker interaction in the combats.
So you talked about the attack there. Let's talk about that. En route, that was one of yours and mine least favorite things, was just this roll these couple of dice and then knock some guys off the board and then the attack's done. So freaking boring. Here you have a system that's super streamlined and super easy to understand the way it is right now. You grab a few dice of the colors that you want. You get to decide. The defender doesn't even roll dice. How awesome is that? Because by nature of the dice themselves, the attacker rolls them. The attacker can take hits on himself from rolling. So it's super streamlined and incredible. It's just one roll, but it doesn't feel awful. It feels pretty good.
Yeah, I was really surprised by this because when I read about the dice system here, I was like, that kind of reminds me of Root, where the attacker rolls the 2 dice, but it doesn't feel like Root at all. And it was always an exciting roll. And you had these choices like, hey, I've got 4 ships attacking. So do I want to take the 4 strongest dice, but they're also the riskiest dice to me? Or do I want to take the 4 safe dice, but I might not even get a hit in? If I just need 1 hit, I might not even get it. Or I can take the dice that let me steal stuff from my opponent, which obviously is strong, but they have a lot of risk as well. And so it was always fun to kind of think like, I got this many dice. This is how many hits I absolutely have to get to make this a successful attack. So how do I want to compose this to give, put the least risk in myself? Always fun. And interesting too, like the symbols on it are really simple, right? You've either got a solid A, which means you just did a hit, or you've got an A outline, which is like a half a hit. So you have to have 2 of those in order to get a hit. So it was even fun to see like, I just rolled 2 half A's,
Yep.
And then the D is a damage to yourself, and then there's like the little gem which lets you steal. So super clear iconography and just a fun blast is like roll that handful of dice and see what came out of it. I was shocked by how much I enjoyed this little battle system.
It was so fun, and you're not going to have any kind of eclipse situations where it's roll, 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 roll. People are sitting around waiting for stuff to happen. It's just, kind of decide what dice you want to take for this battle, and then you just one roll, and you're done. And I do love it's kind of like the Rift Cannon from Eclipse, for instance, where you can do damage to yourself for that higher risk, potentially more attack die. That's so fun to me. I love that mechanic there.
Now, there's really probably just one more mechanism that we haven't really spoken about, and that is, you have a player mat, and you've got a couple types of units you can build to start with. You can build ships, and then you can build factories and excavator, which are the starting buildings you have. When you acquire cards through influence, you can either acquire upgrades to those components, or you can acquire some other types of buildings. The one thing that I was a little surprised by, I like that there's some variety there, but it didn't seem like we really utilized those buildings or other units that we collected very well. So I don't know how valuable those are. Again, it might come out into play more when you're less grouped together. If our units were spread out more, having that stronghold would probably be a much bigger deal. Having those reinforced extractors might be a bigger deal. So I definitely am excited to play this again with a little bit more of a varied setup and see if those come into play a little bit more. But it was always fun to see them. The one last thing I wanted to mention that I really didn't think I was going to like, and when I read the rule book, I was like, this is a really strange decision. Why'd they do this? And that's the hold. So you basically, everything you do in this game is cards. If you collect a card before you research it, like a new upgraded technology, you have to put it in your hold. But also there are 5 types of resources you can get from extractors and other things, and those have to go in your hold. And you can never have more than 6 cards. And I was like, why would they make the resources cards? That's a cheap decision. But ultimately, it actually ended up being really fun. Like the more stuff you collected that you didn't research and build, you were taking up spaces in your hold. And so you were a little, like more restricted for what you could build. It created some interesting decisions and some, challenges. Like, well, I guess I have to dump something. I got to dump this thing that I spent 3 turns researching earlier because I really need these resources for the objective this turn. It put an extra restriction on the game that I thought was pretty interesting. What do you think of the resources and how they were all managed?
Yeah, so you mentioned that they're cards, and that does seem weird, right? When was the last time you played a game where the resources were cards? That was different. So you have those going back and forth and shuffling those around, but it makes sense now. Everything's a standard size. You don't have to worry about like little chunky nuggets of this rolling around anywhere. I like that hold system. I like that you have to carry unresearched technology in the hold, and that makes it susceptible to getting stolen by other players. Same with all the resources. Same with, save this for the end of the game and then play the end of the game and get 3 points. Like,
right.
That could get stolen too, right?
Right.
So that's pretty neat that stuff like that can get nabbed by an opponent. I thought that was really, really neat.
Let's talk about the theme and production on this game. Now, Adam, I have to ask, because when we reviewed Root, you said that you were just done with Kyle Ferrin's artwork, with his cutesy theming. Here we are again with a Leader Games production, Kyle Ferrin's. What did you think this time?
Well, the oranges and blues are still there in Kyle Ferrin's artwork, but they're super toned down and they're mixed in with some some darker colors, some blacks and some whites, and some everything looks a little bit rougher and grittier, and it's not so cheery and in your face. And I absolutely love the artwork here. Everything has tons of character. I think that the artwork is only going to get better. That's kind of the MO for Oath, for instance, and Root, for instance. You go back and look at some of those early versions on TTS, and it just got better and better and more developed as they got closer and closer to the release date. So here already the art's fantastic. I think it's already going to get better. My main complaints with like Root and Fort was just these blaring oranges and blues and bright colors. And at first they're nice to look at, but after a while it got to me. It was a little overstimulating. But here the art just hits for me. It's Kyle Ferrin's style done in a way that I just absolutely loved. What do you think of the art here, Tim?
Yeah, I really like the look and style of this game. And as you mentioned, this may not be a finished production. Maybe it will even be improved further. But I love his little sci-fi art here. All the little aliens in this art is great. The ships look cool. Like just the planets on the board all look really cool. So I really liked it. Otherwise, though, the production is very Root-like, right? You have a few wooden components. The ships are unique shapes. They look like cool big battleships. And then you've got these little agent meeples that have a unique shape to them. So those are nice enough. They're fine. They're uniquely shaped wooden components. But one thing that I think maybe is just a carryover of my feelings from Root is that I never liked the kind of the building components that were used in Root, which are either the circle tiles or the square tiles. And they did the exact same thing here. And that was a shame to me. I mean, it feels very dry and it kind of takes away what otherwise I really liked with the theme.
So if you were interested in backing this game, would you spend the extra $50 to get the miniatures, the plastic damaging to the planet miniatures? Mm-hmm. They're going to give that extra depth and dimension to the buildings, square or circular. What are you going to do with the miniatures here?
I have to admit that I probably would say no normally, and I may still, if I make the decision to back in, I'll talk about that in my final thoughts, I may still not do that because I think the wooden, from the meeples, right, the components, like the wooden components, I think are fine here. But I do, those plastic miniatures that are based on Kyle Ferrin's artwork are adorable. They look really cool because they kind of give you that abstract kind of cartoony feel of his artwork in a very detailed plastic miniature. So they look really rad. So I don't know. I'm kind of having a hard it's a hard choice. Now I got to say, since you're talking about the price to upgrade those components, this feels like a high price to me for the components that are in the box here. Again, they may not be done with the production. There may be more things released over this campaign, or they may have to put more in it. But this is it's a pile of cards and a handful of wooden components and some cardboard sheds.
Just to explain it, there's the 3 levels of the game. There's the base game, the one we played last night. It's just a single play, smaller map, play it, get it done, in and out in, 90 minutes, 2 hours, something like that. Then there's also the campaign mode and expansion stuff. That's at the $100 level, and back me up on that lowest tier level. I'm not sure.
$60 for the lowest tier level. And it's saying that's an $85 MSRP though.
So right, then the next one up is $100, and that gives you the expansion and campaign stuff. And the next one up is $150, and that gives you 80 something miniatures with this little pre-wash that highlights the features of the miniature.
Yeah, and I did not see that they were ink washed, so that definitely adds a little bit of cost there for them. I also didn't realize that so if it's 84 minis, then they must be including I assume that the cubes are going to be replaced with some kind of little plastic components as well.
Yeah, good question, Mitchell.
Base game, $60 for what's in this box. Like, let's take a look at Root, and this feels like a very comparable box of components to me. And that is, I think, a $40 game. Like, that's basically what you can pick Root up retail. And I don't know if that's the MSRP, but I feel like that's about where it falls. And so this being an $85 MSRP for a similar, component set, which is not particularly extravagant in any way. It's very typical Euro. It feels high to me. Now, that being said, like, manufacturing costs are up right now. Shipping costs are up right now. So I think it's possible we're going to be seeing games across the board raising their prices a little bit. And based on the number of pledges that this campaign has gotten, it hasn't turned too many people off. But I have to say, it made me pause a little bit more. If this was a $50 game versus a $85 game, that would make a difference, I think, in how much I feel like I can pledge it when I don't know how much it's going to get played if I bring it into my house. Puts a little more risk on it for me. So felt a little overpriced, but again, maybe that's the direction things are going.
I'm gonna get nitpicky here and say, how come the wood pieces aren't screen printed? We got that in Root, and I think we got that in Root, and we got that in Oath for sure. Oath was a little more. I mean, I think the Oath was like $90 for all of that stuff that they threw in there, with all the Kickstarter, maybe more than that, with all the little Kickstarter booklets and the fancy components and metal coins and this and that. Don't trust me. Go verify that if you're listening out there. Yeah, you're right, Tim. It does seem like a little bit high of a price for what you're getting. And who knows, maybe there's more development on the way. Maybe they will end up screen printing these guys. But for me, the gameplay was cool enough that right now I have it backed at that $100 level. I might change that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say on the theme and production there. So let's jump into our final thoughts, since you're talking about backing it. And, the question is, would you request to play it again? Well, obviously you've chosen to back it at this point. So it sounds like that's a yes for you. So give me your final thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I've been kind of saying positive things all night about it. I was a little turned off after Oath and the complexities there and some of the vocabulary in those rule books. Corley's a smart guy. He loves to flash the words around and develop his own kind of language and lexicon for each game that he develops. He does that a little bit here, but not to the point of being a turn-off. It's a very streamlined game. I think the trick-taking alone and the card play dynamics are just fantastic enough and unique enough and clever enough to make me want that alone. And then you add on this sort of streamlined 4X play, the interactivity that I love in board games. And it doesn't seem overly harsh. You know what you're getting into. Maybe it's harsh. I bet there's some scenarios where someone's going to get slaughtered. And there are cases in the rulebook for player elimination. You get to come back next round and put some guys out there and start back up. You're not out of the game. So yeah, I had a great time playing this game. Things started to click by the third or fourth out of 5 rounds, and we were moving right along. We had this game flowing, Tim. It's the kind of game that I love. I got a lot of PAX Premier feelings from this. I got a couple of Root feelings from this, which I'm not a big Root fan, but the potential for this game and the system, I think, are huge, and I want to have this in my collection. What are you thinking here, Tim?
Yeah, I will definitely request to play this game again. I was shockingly impressed with how much fun I had playing it. I really, again, read the rule book, have some experience with Leader's other games, Root as well as Fort are a couple examples. And I wanted to try it. I was interested in it, obviously, but I really didn't expect it to blow me away. I didn't think it would take the spot of something like Eclipse, which is a game that we love as a 4X game that's pretty streamlined and, straightforward. And believe it or not, I think this is my favorite 4X game that I've played. I think the way that the simplicity of the action selection happens, along with the objectives, the shifting objectives that are happening that kind of just drive you, instead of just saying, hey, go for points, or the objective every game is to take over, buildings and try to build up an economy. It's like what you're doing every game is going to be dictated by the points that are out there available. And I just had a blast pursuing that system. I had a blast with the variety of cards that came up. And I think there's a lot of variety here, even in the, kind of the single game mode that we didn't get to, right? There's lots of cards available. This campaign comes with a little extra stuff expansion. I don't know if that's going to be available in retail, but it's part of the campaign right now. So, that's going to add even more variety to it. I really, really love this game. So I can't wait to play it. Now, am I going to back it? I'm very tempted, very, very tempted, because, not only is it a game that I really had a great time playing, I think it's streamlined enough that if you have 3, and it only plays 3 to 4 players, which is interesting. So I can't even make the argument to say hey, even if nobody's around to play it with me, I'll just play it solo. I think if you have 3 or 4 players here, the teach is pretty straightforward. The first time we were playing through it, I have to say that there were some rules that are kind of weird in here. So it is not the most streamlined game. The basics of the system are pretty straightforward, but we did a lot of rulebook checking on our first play. Again, this is still being developed a bit, so they may streamline the rule book a little bit. Maybe some of that stuff will be cleaned up. But just for some examples, like the trick taking piece of it, where if you lead with a suit and then somebody follows with a suit of a higher number, they get all the benefits on it. But if they follow the same suit with a lower number, they only get one benefit on it. So, just a whole lot of things that were just like little things that are going to come up occasionally, and you had to go and double check the rule book on. The way that ships were produced had to be on a factory, and you could only do one per factory, versus other buildings you just had to pay the resources for them, even though it's the same action. So it's just kind of some of that weird quirky stuff that led to us spending more time on a first play than I would have liked. But that said, like Adam said, by the end of the game we were kind of running right through it, and we had kind of internalized all these rules, and it was not a big deal. So I think now that I played it, I think I could sit down and teach this to somebody in like 10 minutes, maybe max, and we'd be away and playing it and having a really fun, epic experience in this. I think it would be a 2-hour game once you get to playing it. So I'm really tempted to pick it up. It is just a cool package with Kyle Ferrin's artwork, this sci-fi artwork. The box cover looks rad. I think I just might back it before it ends. Haven't 100% decided. And frankly, Adam, I think if I do back it, I'll probably back it at the $150 level. It's a hard choice and totally unnecessary, but I really think that those miniatures are really unique. They don't feel extravagant. They don't feel like overwhelming. They're not just there to just take up a bunch of space, but they really give you Kyle Ferrin's style, fully fledged in these pieces that you don't quite get from the wooden minis. So I'm pretty tempted there. And boy, do I want to explore one of these these trilogy campaigns that you play. It's just 3 games. So they're like, even in the rulebook, they're like, yeah, you can play this over 3 sessions, or just sit down for a 6-hour session. And how fun would that be? It's only 6 hours. It's not like a campaign where you got to play for 12 sessions. This is something you can knock out in an afternoon and just get like this epic changing experience from it. And that just sounds so cool to me. So I'm pretty excited about this game. If you're interested in it, take a look at it. It definitely surprised me. I'm pretty impressed. I think it's a very cool evolution in Cole Worley's designs.
I agree. So a couple more questions for you. Well, I want to reiterate, I think there is a lot of innovation here. The word gets tossed around a lot, but the card play, for one, is fantastic. Like you said, Tim, the campaign over 3 games, over an afternoon, potentially, that's freaking awesome. So what are some games that tried? I guess the Space Corps, the GMT game, kind of tries to do that with the 3 separate eras, but I don't know. To me, this is a different feel than that totally. So I'm digging that. I like the innovation here. What was the point I was going to make? Oh, I wanted to ask you some questions about the 4Xiness of this compared with something like Eclipse or Brian Boru. I think you can take elements from both of those games and say, oh yeah, this is very much like Brian Boru in this regard, Do you think this fits the 4X bill, or do you see it as more like an area control with some dynamic goals and some little auction element over here? How does this fit into the whole, I don't know, it doesn't have to be categorized or anything, but where does this fit for you in the spectrum of 4X and Euro games?
I mean, it definitely feels like a 4X game to me, and I'm not going to go by a very strict definition of, hey, it has to have all 4Xs, but if you're going to compare it to something like Eclipse, yeah, absolutely. It definitely gave me that feel. One of the things I think that I liked more about this versus other type of 4X games or even area control games, because that is partly what this is doing, right? Like you want to take control over it. But I think one of the kind of neat things is that people weren't just motivated to go in and knock other people out, right? Like that could be something, but I think even if you were getting attacked, even if you had maybe weaker forces, there's still opportunities for the objective cards up here that come up here to like pivot and maybe do something. Great example, right? Like, so we had our endgame objective card that I was talking about where you were trying to collect resources and change them in with influence. And I just had not built up a good extractor engine. I didn't have a way to produce the right types of resources or any decent amount of resources over the course of the game. So we got into the final round and you and Steve both started trying to nail that thing. So you're using all your actions to put influence cubes out there, which would have been really beneficial if like one of you had done it, or, maybe you'd put 2 influence cubes out there. But because you guys were fighting over it, you both ended up using like 4 or 5 actions to try to take advantage of this thing. It was a lot of points, but I just realized early, I was like, I can't even touch this thing. So I'm going to go and try to spread out, get the last couple round objectives, maybe kill a couple blight and get some points that way. And I managed to barely scrape by and win the game. But it was kind of cool that I wasn't forced into that thing that seemed like a very important part of the game. And I also think there were opportunities here. Like there was only a couple objective cards that really rewarded having a large fleet or fighting. Some of it was just about having the right types of territory. Some of it's having the right types of resources to collect. So I think there's a lot of different ways that this game is going to allow you to work towards victory, even if it feels like, maybe you're being beat up on, or you started in the wrong position and got knocked out early or something like that. So I sure had a fun time playing it. Never had any bad feelings about, when Steve was coming into my territory, or, Adam was like, Steve, you got to go knock Tim out. He's in the lead, and I was just like, that's okay. If he comes down over here, I've got this objective card coming up next. I'm going to go work on that over on this part. And to me, it really made the whole experience more fun. And, for me, who doesn't like that, like the meanness of area control, sometimes it didn't feel that way.
That's one thing I wanted to note too, the ability for long range planning, not, I guess, short term. You got it all. You got the very short term, you got the intermediate term, and you got the long range planning with the way that the goals are laid out. It's freaking perfect. You can look ahead. You can try to start planning for that end game goal. It's going to give you those big chunk of points, or you can try to hit these intermediate goals. You can see what's coming up. The ability to plan and forward thinking, it just nails it, knocks it out of the park for me in this game.
Yeah, agreed. All right, cool. Well, I think that'll wrap up our conversation on ARCs. We'll talk about some games on our table right after this. All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about just a couple quick games. The first one I want to mention is I finally got a chance to play a game called Biblios. Biblios is a very simple small box game that has been touted aggressively by...
There's some other podcasts that loves this game, right? At least one person from one other podcast freaking loves this game.
Some other podcast with board game in the name. Yeah. So I think it's Mark from Board Game Barrage has been talking about this game for years. And I'd heard about it before, but I think it's kind of a running joke for them now, where it's the best game in the world for him. He's not far off, I gotta say. So I got a chance to play this game and really, really loved it. In fact, it looks like it's out of print right now, or I would already have a copy for myself. So I'll be watching for this. I'm hoping or expecting it will come back in print. But this game is really simple. It's basically played in two phases. What's happening is in the first round, you have kind of this hidden auction, which is really fun. It's really interesting. What happens, we played a 3-player game. So what would happen in a 3-player game is that the person whose turn it is going to pick 4 cards off the top of the deck, but they're going to look at them one at a time. So the first card they pick up, they can either basically buy it, you have to pay a coin or whatever for it, or you can put it into a future auction. So you're going to put it in this face down pile that's going to be auctioned in the second phase of the game. Or you can put it face up, and then 2 of those cards are going to be face up and available for the other players to purchase. That's a really interesting decision, right? Because the first card, that's a decent card, but it's not the best card. But I think I can get a better card. So I'm going to put that in the future auction. And then the next card that comes up, that's junk. And the next 2 cards come up, that's junk. So like sometimes you're taking a risk by not taking something that's okay. But also sometimes you're like, that last card you pull off the pile is like the best card, or exactly the card you're looking for. So that was fun. And it goes pretty quickly. I think it probably took us like 8 to 10 minutes to get through that first phase, where we're all just going around picking up piles, putting them up for auction. The point of collecting these cards before I get into the second phase is that you're basically trying to collect the largest amounts in these 5 different colors of books. The theme has something to do with being monks and trying to put together a monastery or something like that.
So hold on, you're telling me this is set collection also, Tim? What's going on here?
Not exactly. I mean, okay. You're collecting sets of the colors, but they have numbers on them. So you're bidding for the more powerful cards.
Got it.
And then the value of those points are based on these dice that can be adjusted. So each of the 5 colors starts at a 3 pip dice. These dice don't get rolled or anything, but it's just a marker to say what's the value of that. So if I have a red cards and I get the opportunity, there's some cards in the deck that will allow you increase or decrease the value of dice. So if I've started to collect these red cards, and it's a hidden, I know this, but nobody else really knows what cards I have in my hand, or they don't know most of them. So I might start to raise the value of those 4 ones, because every number that I have of red at the end of the game is going to be worth 4 instead of 3. Total number of points you're going to win is going to be worth the number of that pip set. So if I have the majority of reds at the end of the game, by default it would be 3 points. So it's very low scoring, but I might be able to get up to 4 points. And if you can imagine, basically you're bidding for 5 different 3-point colors. There's a max of 15 points available unless some of those dice get adjusted up. So if 2 people win 2 sets, they're both going to be sitting at 6 points. One person would be at 3 points. So if you can adjust one of your colors up and nobody else is adjust it back down, then you've just won by 1 point. So it's a very tight point spread that happens here. Anyway, so after you've gone through this first round of action, so you've got a hand of cards, your opponents have hands of cards, and then there's this face down deck. And then basically what happens from there is that everybody you flip a card off the top of the deck and you're auctioning for it. It's a public auction. And so you'll be like, the cards that you've collected over the course of the game, most of them are these books, but there's also these money cards. And so you might say like, okay, I'm going to bid 2 silver for that. And the person next to you says, I'm going to bid 3 silver. And then, okay, then I'll pass. So you just got that for 3 silver, but now you have 3 less silver in your hand. And you're trying to kind of think like, what cards did I put in this public pile, or am I hoping is going to come up so that I can bid for them? And if money comes up in the public pile, then you can bid books for them. So there might be a color that you're really not going for. Like, somebody's got a whole bunch of blues based on some of the information you've seen. I don't care about this 2 blue. So I'll bid this 2 blue book for that, 2 coin card that comes up. So I have more to bid on that turn. And it gets to be a very tight auction where you can kind of push someone to spend a lot of money on one card, and then they're going to lose every other auction in the rest of the game. So, it's these 2 quick phases, fun revelation at the end of the game as far as who had the highest points at each color, but it goes super quick. I think we played a 3-player game in 15 minutes, played 2 back to back. This is a great game. This is a really fun, I think for me, this would be my small box card game of choice at this point. And it comes in a great little package. It looks like a book, like an old, Bible or something like that, the little box that it comes in. So a really cool little production, simple mechanisms, but yeah, great game. Mark is right on from Board Game Barrage. He definitely has picked the winner here.
That sounds great, Tim. Sounds amazing. I was taking a quick look at it as you were talking about it. It looks super fun. I can't believe I haven't played this one yet. I need to get this one on the table.
Yeah.
3-player minimum here?
I think there is a 2-player mode, and I think you can play up to 4. I don't know if the rules change at 2 players, although I suspect you could play it pretty much the same at 2 players. I think it'd be a little less dynamic. I played with the person who introduced it to me, my neighbor, Paul. He said that he really likes it at 3. 4 gets a little too chaotic. You can't really track what's happening around the table. Okay. And 2 is just not as interesting because you kind of know, okay, I've got all these yellows. I'm not really competing for somebody. So 3 was great. I would definitely try it at 4. Probably not super fun at 2.
It says 2 to 4 here on Board Game Geek and best at 3.
All right, cool. So the other game that I wanted to just mention briefly, and I'm going to circle back on this because we did talk about this in a previous episode, and that is Now or Never by Red Raven Games, and Ryan Lockett's the designer on this. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how the game works, but it's an interesting Euro game with a bit of an economic structure to it, but it's also story-driven. One of the ways that you're going to go about and pick up money basically goods that you can trade for money in this game is to move about and go to different sites and search them. And then there's a little storybook element. So it adds a lot of theme into what is otherwise a reasonably heavy and dry Euro mechanism set. That said, it's a fun game. I really enjoyed my multiplayer games of this game, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the solo mode for it, because the reason I added this game to my collection was because I figured, again, this is one of those games that I'm probably not going to get a lot of plays with other people, but I think I could enjoy it solo. This game is going to be leaving my collection because I really don't enjoy the solo experience here, and I want to talk about why. Number one is it feels like there's a couple hints that the solo mode was intended to operate in a different way than the final version did. For example, it's really simple to operate. Basically what happens is that because you're trying to move around the board and get to certain spots, there's monsters you can attack, and those are limited in the supply. And then there's places you can search, and there's villagers you can collect. But this is all competition from other players for collecting the most valuable villagers into your city, or to move to a spot before someone else takes it, because multiple people can't explore the same spot. So all the AI is really doing is it's essentially you flip over a card and it tells you which monster gets removed from the board, or which search icon gets removed, or which villager gets removed. So it's kind of just taking away some of the stuff that you would want to get to. That's fine. It's super easy to operate. You flip over a card, you do what it says. One of the cards in there tells you, when you flip it over, to roll a dice and then either take the top card off of these objective card decks, or take the top order off this little stack of orders, which can be turned in for points later. But there is absolutely no value to do that for the AI. So I suspect that originally the AI was written to, you kind of score it like a human opponent. Like they could potentially have objectives that you would score, or they can pick up these orders and you would score them. So for one, that just feels bad. You turn that card over and I'm like, there's no reason for me to take a card off the top of a deck. It doesn't change the game at all. So basically I just treat it as a free turn, and that feels kind of weak. The other thing is that the objective when you're playing solo is beat 100 points or beat your previous score if you've beat 100 points. Now, I don't hate a game that gives you a point target if it's challenging to hit and if it's going to be challenging to hit every time I play it. Like Underwater City is a great example. I've never beat the solo mode on that because it's just right outside of my threshold of how successful I usually am at playing that game. And, there may be a little bit of very tough, close decisions that would get you to 100 points there. A Feast for Odin is another great one. Those are fun Euro games that have that kind of condition that work okay for me. In this game, it's pretty, I think, luck dependent. It's going to be very situational based on how well you can do in this game. From a couple of reasons. One is the pool of villagers that are available are going to change game to game, and they don't reflush that often. So you could get stuck with just a set of villagers that aren't very helpful to you. And this would happen if you're playing a multiplayer game. That's fine because everybody's stuck with those same issues, but then you're just competing with your opponent with the conditions that are available on the board. But when I'm playing in a solo mode against, a random board setup, that's pretty variable. But what I found was easy to beat that 100-point thing. And then I was like, well, now I'm playing this game with a variable setup. So I had a great first game. I might never win it again. And that didn't feel good at all to me. Now, the experience of playing the game is fun. It's a fun game. I played it once, 2-player with Steve, had a really good time with it. I would have loved to explore this further. But I decided to go ahead and just try to play through all 6 stories of the story mode with one character in here. And I got through the second story and I was just like, it just wasn't an appealing scenario for me to go through. It was fun to play the game, but it wasn't fun to not really have an objective that mattered at the end of the game. Like I didn't really feel like I was winning or losing. I could play the best I could and I might not win because of the conditions in the game. And it didn't really feel like what I was going to do would impact that much. I don't know. Something about it just didn't feel like I had a lot of agency in basically the win condition wasn't interesting. So ultimately I decided, like, after I set it up a second time, and it's a fairly heavy game and it's fairly long and it's a big setup. It's a lot of components. And so I was like, well, if I put this back in the box right now, I'm probably not going to want to get it out again for several months to set it up. And then I'm going to have to relearn all the rules. And it's a Ryan Lockett game, so it's got a lot of heavy edge rules you got to look up all the time. Or I can leave it out and keep playing it. And then I was like, but there's so many other games I'd rather be playing than this solo right now. I played 3 games of Dune Imperium the day before that solo and had so much more fun playing that game than I did playing this game. Ark Nova.
I told you Dune Imperium is fantastic solo game.
Oh, but it's only because Rise of X fixed it. Rise of X makes it so much better. For me it does anyway. Yeah, so, but anyway, yeah, so that's my feeling about Now or Never. I thought I'd just circle back on that because I talked pretty highly, but I think it's a really interesting game. I think if I had the right group of people that want like a very thematic Euro with some story elements in here, like I really like Ryan Lockett's games because of those things. But I don't think it's not necessarily going to be easy to find somebody that wants to go back to this with you regularly. And for having one of these in my collection that I might pull out and teach somebody once in a while, I'm going to keep Near and Far in my collection because I think it's a little more streamlined, a little bit easier to get other people introduced to, and it gives me those same elements. So Now or Never is leaving my collection. I'm going to ship it out to Riley Stock. He's been asking about it, so I'm going to send it over to him and see what he thinks of it.
So I think you may have answered this already, but a couple questions for you. Hearing you describe it and taking a look at some images of it, it gives me, at least, superficially, some feels from, was it Viscounts of the West Kingdom or Architects of the West Kingdom?
Okay.
One of those two. And Lost Ruins of Arnak. You're talking about going to monsters and conquer these monsters, getting the thing. Whatever. The point I'm trying to get at is, what would you recommend for people looking for a solo experience instead of Now or Never?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, Near and Far, which is the game of his I'm going to keep, doesn't have a solo mode for it. So I can't even recommend that as an alternative. But the games that I definitely prefer of a similar kind of similar weight, I guess. I just mentioned Dune Imperium. I'd rather play Lost Ruins. It's much quicker setup and gameplay is pretty quick and rapid. Viscounts of the West Kingdom and Architects of the West Kingdom I have been having a blast with lately. So, those are the games that I would pick. Like when I was sitting here saying, should I just keep this set up to play again? Then I was like, no, I want to play all of those games instead.
That sounds like Sleeping Gods from what I've heard about too. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one where you're like the pirates on the ship kind of exploring this world. So for a narrative storytelling, I've heard a lot of good things about Sleeping Gods. Never played it, but that seems to work well at 1 or 2 players for a kind of story adventure game.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Sleeping Gods because they just had a follow-up Kickstarter to Sleeping Gods called Sleeping Gods Distant Skies, which is supposed to be kind of a new, let's say, version 2 or kind of like a streamlined version of Sleeping Gods. I have heard great things about Sleeping Gods. In fact, it just made it to the top 100 on Board Game Geek today. So congratulations to Ryan Lockett. That's a big achievement. When I look at Sleeping Gods, though, if I'm going to play it solo, basically no matter how many players you play with, you manage 9 characters with slightly asymmetric abilities. And that just feels like a headache. Like I don't want to like follow that much information. So that always bugged me, but I was still ready to pull the trigger and give it a try. So ready, I almost ordered it. And then this new campaign came out, and it looks like with Distant Skies, you're only managing like 4 or 5 characters. And it sounds like it, even though the combat system, and it looked really fun before, this kind of fuzzy, fun, puzzly combat system, it's now added a little bit of a deck building element to it, which makes it seem even more interesting to me. So I'm going to try this version 2. I did back the Kickstarter on that. Was tempted to back the original too, and I was like, nope, I don't need to do that, because if the new one's great, that's fine. Maybe then I'll go back and play the original, and if the new one's not great, then I'll have tried this a little bit more streamlined version.
And that's the one that comes with a little airplane that you said you're going to give to me. Is that right?
the painted airplane that you're definitely not going to get. But I'll play it with you if you ever want to come visit.
All right, I definitely won't be trying to steal that and put that in my bag as I'm out the door.
All right, well, I think that will wrap up the games that have been on our table this week. I did want to call out a listener who left us a nice review this week. Always wonderful to see these come in all the time. So if you like the show and want to help more people find us, or just give us some kudos and appreciating the show or enjoying it, we'd appreciate it if you'd leave a review for us. Apple Podcasts seems to be the most common place to leave them, but whatever platform you listen to. So this listener said, excellent podcast, both team and content. This is my go-to podcast and the only reason I look forward to mowing and doing yard work in Houston's ridiculous heat and humidity. Glad that we can make your day a little bit better, because I know that can be awful. The format is great. The variety of games and content keeps things fresh, and the team's views differ enough to keep things interesting each episode. Games discussed include older, newer, popular, obscure, highly rated, and hot mess. And he put Tetris the card game in parentheses here. Yes. If you are looking for hot messes, you can just listen for Adam's on the table segment. The closing segment, sharing a beverage recipe that ties into the episode's theme, is great, especially with the brief history around either the beverage creator and or ingredients. And so thank you, Chris, of course, for always giving that fun little flavor when you're on the show, which you usually are. You didn't get to join us today, unfortunately. And that was from Leary81 on Apple Podcasts. So thank you so much. Really nice review. Glad to hear that we're making your day a little cooler in Houston as you're doing your yard work. And always just fun to hear that people are listening and appreciating and enjoying the show. So thanks for that.
That's a great review. So thank you for that. I want to echo the sentiment there about Chris. I think he spends about 20 hours a week writing those drink segments. They're fantastic, Chris. I'm kidding, of course, but he does put in tons of work to researching this. I love all the stories that he tells and the way he puts it together. Fantastic work, Chris. I just want to give you a nice compliment while you're not here to blush about it or dismiss it away. Great work, Chris. Miss you. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, and if you ever listen to that segment and get inspired to make one of the cocktails there, share a picture with us on Twitter at BG_hot takes, and we'll retweet your picture and share it with the world. Love to hear people that are appreciating hearing about the show, but I would love to hear if some people are actually attempting these interesting cocktails that Chris concocts. All right, well, I think that will wrap us up. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.